Happy New Year's Eve. I love New Year's for a lot of reasons. First one is, when I was a kid especially, we got to stay up. My parents actually let us stay up. They let us stay up until midnight. And I think until I was 15, I only was able to stay up for about one out of the 15 times, right? But I was always excited for the opportunity. And then now as an adult, I get excited because I love the idea of new goals, right? And New Year's resolutions. I love the idea of planning for the future and coming up with something to look forward to. And I'm sure some of you guys have been thinking about those New Year's resolutions too. And so my question is here to start off is, have you ever made a New Year's resolution that you actually managed to complete? Anybody? Oh, that's great. Okay, that's good. If not, you're not alone. Every year, 38.5% of American adults make a resolution, yet only 9% of the people keep it. Of those who do quit, 23% don't make it through the first week, and 64% have given up by February. The most common broken New Year's resolutions all surround making healthier life choices, such as quitting drinking, smoking, eating healthier, losing some weight, and exercising more. And I'm sure none of us here have that problem, any of these things, right? Now, while we want to see the change of our yearly resolutions bring us life, we're not always willing to fully commit to that change. Then what happens next is that people give up because they lose that motivation and they have not prioritized their goals. Or they swap their resolutions for newer, more relevant personal goals. Perhaps this year, instead of resolutions, rather than adding something new to an already busy schedule, we should start a new year with a strategic plan to begin removing old, destructive habits and mindsets that are preventing us from stepping into all God has in store for this upcoming year. When we are committed to letting go of these things that are holding us back from making our dreams a reality, we become more motivated to see the new changes. And maybe this year is less about us and more about Him. And here's the reality. It can be frightening to let go of the things God asks us to do. We can hold tightly to what we're familiar with, even if we know it's not best for us in the long run, rather than embracing a change that requires us to step out in faith, to trust God more. We gravitate towards remaining in our comfort zone. So my question we're going to be asking a lot today is, what are you holding on to? What are you holding on to that God is asking you to give up? And I always think this is just a great thing to talk about on New Year's, either after New Year's or right before New Year's, because it gets us thinking. We're thinking about new things. So what is God asking you to let go of? Jesus, in his time on earth, had to address this issue as well. How do I get rid of the old and bring in the new? How do I get rid of the old and bring in the new? And that starts us off on our first verse 18. It says, "Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, 'Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?'" Now, before we get into Jesus' answer, let me give you some context. What is fasting? What was fasting like in Israel at the time? Who fasted? Why did they fast? How often did they fast? We need to know these things to understand the story. Fasting is essentially giving up food or something else for a period of time in order to focus your thoughts and your prayers on God. You're replacing that meal with time with God. And as far as the Bible and the Old Testament was concerned, there was only one fast mandated for God's people each year, and that was the Day of Atonement. Israel would abstain from food, and you see this in Leviticus 16, 29 through 30. That's it. One fast a year. Though they were allowed to fast more often, they were only required by Scripture one day each year. And the Bible does describe, however, additional times of fasting, usually during a time of grief or sorrow, weeping, or an emergency. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple, when Ezra implored them to repent of sin, or when there was a war, a plague, a drought came upon them, the nation would fast. And additionally, individuals would fast in response to personal tragedies, such as death of a loved one, sickness, or other personal trials. But the Pharisees had developed fasting into a religious practice. For them, fasting was not a response to the pains of life, but a ritual. They fasted on Mondays and Thursdays and drew attention to themselves in the process. Jesus actually mentioned them on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6:16. He says, "And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, and their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward." We see Jesus already has a problem with the way that the religious people are fasting. And he's bringing it up again. And when these people fasted, again, it wasn't for an emergency. It wasn't for sorrow. It wasn't for trying to get God's attention, but rather it was to show people that they were holy. It was to show people that there was something special about them. So they would actually make their face disfigured, and they would look, sad, and people would see them and be like, "Oh, look, he's so holy. He's fasting. What a holy guy," right? It wasn't about God. It was about the outward appearance for them. And we also learn here in this passage that the disciples of John also fasted. John's whole preaching ministry was designed to prepare the way for the Messiah Christ. John was in prison during this time, most likely, and so it's possible his disciples fasted for their beloved leader who was in prison, but it's likely they fasted as a way to pray for the Messiah's coming. They wanted Christ to come. And in Mark 2, Jesus is confronted by people who are curious to know why the disciples of John the Baptist and the Pharisees, the Jewish religious leaders, would fast, but his own disciples did not. And again, at this time, these stricter Pharisees fasted twice each week to demonstrate their religious piety. It would have been unusual for a rabbi's disciples to avoid fasting, since fasting was an important practice to join with prayer or patience. So here's the reality. They're asking this big question. They're saying, "We're all doing this. Why are your guys not doing this? What's wrong with you?" And so Jesus responds to them. Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and they will fast in that day." And then he goes on, he says, "No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth and on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins." So Jesus' response to their question includes 3 short parables about fasting at a wedding, patching an old garment, and pouring new wine into old wineskins. The first being a wedding reminds me a lot of my wedding. That's why when I think of weddings, I just think about my wedding. June 19th, 2010, I got married to the most amazing person, she's over there, that God gave me. And I just remember the celebration. We got married in Turlock, and then I'm Portuguese, so then we were able to rent out a Portuguese hall. One of my uncles let us use. And I just remember that time just being a big celebration. If you've ever been to a Portuguese wedding, there's like 600 of us there. And we're just eating, and then there's more stuff that comes out, treats, and there's dancing. And it is just an awesome time. And it's all to celebrate the marriage between my wife and I. And during this time, if you look at my wedding with my wife was nothing compared to the weddings that they would have during ancient Israel time. The things that they partook in whenever a bride and groom tied the knot. For 7 days, the whole village would party. The newly married couple was treated like royalty for a full week. And the friends and guests had no responsibilities but to enjoy the festivities. That's all they had to do. And the whole thing started whatever, or during a specific window of time, the groom decided to show, right? And the trumpets blasted and the party got started, right? That you can imagine that. You're all waiting and then all of a sudden, there he is. Boop, boop, boop. I'm sure it was a different noise. But everybody goes, yeah, it's happening. So when Jesus gave his answer, they were all well aware of the joy that a wedding brought. And Jesus says, can the wedding's guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. See, they knew wedding guests or friends of the groom would never fast as long as the wedding celebration was happening. In fact, Jesus says they could not fast because the religious authorities actually outlawed this behavior. Apparently, some of these religious figures felt that they should still fast even during a wedding. So they actually had to make a law, no fasting during a wedding. So what is Jesus saying here with this whole wedding? Well, he's saying, look at verse 19, he is like the bridegroom, and his disciples are like the wedding guests. The bridegroom had arrived, he's present, and the only proper response was feasting, not fasting. And it was necessary for the disciples to rejoice because they had Jesus with them. They had the Son of God. They had the one they were waiting for. He's right there. And the idea of the wedding imagery Jesus used is simple. It's about Jesus. God is here, he came, and the disciples would be foolish to do anything other than to celebrate his presence. That's his answer to them. I'm here, why would they fast? This leads me to my first point. Jesus is our cause for joy. I just want you to take a moment. Think about 2023. For some of you, a lot of exciting things. Maybe you had a new child, new grandchild come into the family. Maybe you bought your first house, got a new car, got straight A's, whatever it might be. It was an exciting time. And you have the opportunity to express joy and go, this was great. For some of us, it was not. It's a year that we wish we could forget. But in both of those situations, I think we need to think about our cause for joy. What's the reason we have joy? See, 2024 is coming up tomorrow, right? See you guys next year after this sermon. And there's a lot of things that we look forward to and we go, this is exciting. And then there's other things we look forward to and we say, not again, right? I think of our presidential election that's going to happen next year and how mean everybody gets towards one another. It hurts me. And I think, I don't want that. I don't want to see that again. It's annoying. And then I think about how I have friends and family members who are going through hard things and who are going to be going through chemo in the future and are wondering, how many more years do I still have? Here's the great thing. Regardless of where you are and what's happening in your life, we can know that Jesus is the cause for joy and that we can have joy in all situations. Again, and in tough times, it's important to remember we have the root cause of all true joy. Believers have Jesus. He has come. We have a personal relationship with God because the Son of God made a way for us to connect to our Father in heaven. And he gives us his Spirit. His indwelling presence in us is our true source of joy. In one sense, we need to receive Jesus' permission to have joy. It's tempting to become troubled and depressed, overwhelmed and stressed. But we have Jesus. And because we have him, we have a reason for gladness and joy. Like wedding guests in the middle of a celebration, we get to party because Jesus has come. And we know him. And don't lose this, church. King Jesus has come. King Jesus reigns supreme, and King Jesus will come again. Though pestilence looms, Jesus will come. Even if, God forbid, death takes us, Jesus will one day resurrect us. If we worship at the altar of money, health, or a sense of control, our joy will only be temporary. But if we worship and honor the true God, if we rejoice over Jesus, we can have joy that lasts. The bridegroom has come, he is ours. Let me give you some practical ways to cultivate some of this joy. Go really fast through this. 1, read about Jesus, his life, and the things that he's done. It's so refreshing. Recall those things. See what Jesus did. Open that scripture. It's like good medicine for your soul. Feeds it. 2, talk with Jesus. Spend time walking and talking with your Lord. He will help you recapture your joy that you need, or the joy that you're looking for. 3, obey Jesus. Nothing saps our joy like disobedience. In the darkness, we struggle for joy, but there is gladness when walking in Jesus' light. Obey what God's calling you to do. It brings so much joy. And last for that, remember Jesus' eternal kingdom. When life is chaotic, we must recall the ultimate destiny of all God's children. And that's being in the presence with our loving and amazing Creator. But, not but to what I just said, but Jesus had more to say. So let's continue. Mark 2:20 says this: the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. So he's answering that question. He's saying, they're asking, why aren't you guys fasting? He says, why would you fast? I'm here. The bridegroom's here. This is a party. We should be rejoicing. But then he does say, there is going to come a day. And this is twofold, maybe even threefold, right? That he could be referring to him dying in the future. And then during that time of sorrow and the disciples trying to figure out what's going on, I'm sure there wasn't much eating going on. There was fasting going on. It could even be talking about Jesus coming back again and us as believers holding on and remembering and fasting during those times. Because let me just make this clear, fasting is not a bad thing. It was the way the religious leaders were fasting that was the problem. But the point that Jesus is trying to make here is that I'm here at this moment. Let's celebrate. Get away from doing something just to do it because you think it's right or it makes you feel good. Instead, do what I'm telling you to do. Celebrate with me. I'm here. But after making this point, through the imagery of wedding, Jesus used 2 more illustrations to make one more massive point. Verse 21. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed. And so are the skins, but new wine is for fresh wineskins. Remember, the disciples of John and the Pharisees wondered why Jesus didn't fast. They questioned his practices. Why aren't you doing what we do? These are all well-established traditions, rhythms, and routines. And so who are you, Jesus, to mess with the system? Do you think you're better than us? This is kind of the question they're asking. Now, Jesus uses, again, 2 images to demonstrate this now outdated religious ways they practiced. First, he said, no one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth to an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it and then from the old, and a worse tear is made. We all understand this first image. If you patch an old garment with new material, the unshrunk material will shrink when washing and it'll create a worse tear of the old garment. We understand that, right? But the illustration for the wineskins, the second one, where he says that no one puts new wine into old wineskins, is something a little harder for us modern readers to understand. In those days, they actually stored wine in wineskins. And these wineskins were often made of the skin of a goat. And all the holes would be tied off, and they'd empty the goat skin, and it would be filled with wine. And the unfermented wine needed a fresh goat skin. During fermentation, the wine would actually expand, and the wineskin needed to expand with it. And if it was an old, ragged, or already stretched out wineskin, the new wine would burst when fermentation occurred. So wine and wineskin would be destroyed. I actually had a picture of this so you guys could see, and my wife said, "That's disgusting, you cannot put that up." So it was an old wineskin, I'm so sorry, so I'm trying to describe it the best I can. So what is Jesus saying? What does he intend with these two images? Well, remember that he's talking to the religion of that day. They wanted Jesus to adopt their practices. Jesus is letting them know, I'm not an old patch. I'm not old wine. I'm a new cloth and new wine. I cannot be added to you. I came to fulfill